Good morning. We're here at the entrance of the Smith Richardson Audubon Wildlife Preserve in Greens Farms with Patrick Comins, Executive Director of the Connecticut Audubon. Patrick, we would like you to say a few words about this unique property and the long-term goals for the future of this beautiful piece of open space.
Sure. The Smith Richardson Preserve is really a special place, and the transformation here has just been amazing. It's been one of the most gratifying restoration projects I've been involved with in my more than 20 years in conservation. It is one of the largest pieces of green space here in Lower Fairfield County, and as such is an important stopover for many migrating birds.
I had a question. How can neighbors in our community support the expansion of flora and fauna that this preserve provides?
Sure. One way is by planting natives in their own yards to expand the connectivity of the landscape for pollinators and for birds. You can do it in really small areas by planting native pollinator gardens, but planting host plants for butterflies. You can also get engaged as a volunteer here. You can check out our website, ctaudubon.org. We have volunteer days. We're starting to gear up more with volunteers now that the state is starting to open back up. And of course, we need the support of the community. This is all done from the generosity of supporters, members, and neighbors, and we can't do it without you.
Thank you so much for adding those words. That's so important. Could you say a few words about Charlie Stebbins and Jerid O'Connell, who spearheaded this particular effort at Smith
Sure.
Richardson?
When I came on, I became executive director in July of 2017. And when I got here, this project was well underway. And it was Charlie and Jerid, who were board members, Connecticut Audubon Society board members at that time, who had really taken the initiative and started transforming this place.
Well, we are so glad that you came down here to talk to us today, and we are looking forward to going into the preserve right now and meeting Jerid and Charlie. Thank you again, Patrick, for the work that you do and also for the work Audubon does. A big thank you to both of you who turned this jungle of invasives into a preserve that has become a sanctuary for birds, beetles, bees in our community. Adhering to the rules of social distancing, we will keep Jerid and Charlie 6 feet apart. Let's start with you, Jerid O'Connell. What was the spark that started this flurry of activity in this incredible preserve?
In 1999, I moved next to the preserve, and I heard about the 74.1 acres that was left in Greens Farm. And I was astonished that there was that much land that was left undeveloped in an area that was so affluent and land was a premium. I walked back here, and even in 1999, the invasives had made their mark. It was damaged, but there was still plenty of trees. There's 3 good groves full of owls. But by 2013, the invasives had really done it. They'd done in the place, and it seemed to be such a shame to me. I had sent an email out in November of 2013 to the Connecticut Audubon, who were the stewards of it, and said, let's find a way to preserve this. It's just too much of a treasure. That's when I called them. They came. Charlie Stebbins, who was on the board at the time, came to visit, and that was the beginning of the project.
Great. Charlie, could you share what happened when you got involved?
Well, then everything obviously fell right into place, and it went lickety-split.
2 weeks later, the place was
2 weeks later, the place was perfect.
Got rid of invasives.
That's it. That's all it took.
Round up some grass seed. The place is
All right,
beautiful.
all right. The real story, I'd actually joined the board just the prior year, and I guess that's 2012. And I wanted to get involved on the sanctuary and conservation side, and we frankly were looking at a beautiful, beautiful piece of property up in Old Lyme. It fell through, and all of a sudden this other project came out of nowhere, and I didn't know anything about Jerid. I didn't know anything about the Greens Farms property, and I came down to visit it. I couldn't even get onto the property because, as Jerid said, it was so clogged with bittersweet, mile-a-minute, and all kinds of buckthorn and such. And Jerid and I put our heads together and said, you know what? We need volunteers, we need help, we don't have a budget, but why don't we have a neighborhood lopper day, right? Cut the vines day, and that was the very first volunteer day, and that was in November of 2013.
I think so.
Right? And we hacked our way into the preserve starting at Jerid's driveway, more or less, and that was the beginning.
The problem with the project, I've been talking to the neighbors, we all live around the preserve, and it seemed too daunting. 74 acres, totally overgrown, seemed that it was many, many, many years, many, many, many millions of dollars, and I couldn't get any enthusiasm. It just seemed hopeless, and it seemed like there wasn't any enthusiasm. It wasn't until Charlie and I started really concentrating on making small improvements, which is where the first volunteer day came in. We knew there was trees there that were still alive. You can see this is what they look like. They were covered with vines, but there was a chance, and if you
Exhibit A.
Exhibit A. That's
This
probably
is
a 25-year-old.
25-year-old bittersweet. This was cut probably 5 or 6 years ago, and you still can't get it out of the tree, so you just leave it up there so it falls of its own weight. But that's an example of what we were facing, tree after tree after tree.
There's a good example right behind Jerid,
There's another one, yeah.
and this I think you mentioned, this is how the forest looked in here. Am I correct?
The whole forest, there was only a few trees. They were covered with vines. I watched from 1999 to 2013, the trees one by one get killed by these vines, invasive vines, non-native vines. There was basically nothing native. You'd walk back here, if you could even get through it, which was almost impossible, there was almost no insect life because there were non-native plants. And that's where we began the project. And we began it with the first volunteer day. Our first fundraiser, we raised $600, which didn't do too much.
A small thermometer.
Yeah, we had the thermometer.
The
And it
mercury was only
mercury
like that.
there,
yeah.
and please help with a smiley face. $600 later. So we started with a volunteer day, and with the help of the Staples League of Boys called the Slobs, and the incredible Builders Beyond Borders, and the neighbors would donate at least a few hours of their time, and we got about 100 people the first day. And that was now 6 years ago, and we just started chopping and saving trees, and people could see the change. So no, you can't preserve. We didn't know where the money was going to come from. We didn't know how we were going to do this. But you see a tree that was going to die like this, and you chop it, and you feel good about it.
This is really what this whole meadow looked like. We have a beautiful field now with crab apples and the spruce that survived. Very few spruce did survive. You can see the White House in the back. When you look at this before picture, the house is a little glint of white above this sea of invasive. And you know, you can see this was porcelain berry. We still have wine berry that's coming back up. This is Milan Bull, which wasn't even here 20 years ago. We already, I mean, you look up here and you can see the bittersweet, the Milan Bull, the porcelain berry. And you know, you got to come to a border somewhere, and this is as far as we could go for want of resources and funds. But we would love to save every tree, you just can't. But I think we did a pretty good job of taking the 36 acres, triaging literally what we could save, what we couldn't. And then the big breakthrough came when we got the $145,000 grant from National Fish and Wildlife. That's, to Jerid's point, that's where we said, oh my goodness, we can actually do this.
I was going to ask you if we could walk over to that fenced area there and talk a little bit about some of the other challenges that you face when you're working at preserving this.
Sure.
Charlie, could you please come in here and tell us what in the heck is going on here with all these plastic tubes and these cages around the trees?
Can you see the plastic tubes here?
I can.
Okay. It comes down to critter crunching, right? Either the deer or the rabbits, and we fight them both equally. This is to keep the deer browse away. That means the chewing from the deer, which is year-round. But also in the fall, there's something called the rut, where the male deer, the stags, have their antlers and they're covered with velvet, and they need to rub that velvet off to get their testosterone growing, to get ready for mating. And that happens around the middle of October, and a second rut happens in early December, and it's so destructive because these deer are big animals, they're very, very strong, and they're very motivated, and they will shred something like this so that you'll basically have nothing but a stump at the end of the day. and they'll take young trees, birch, aspen, in particular the softer wooded trees, cherries, and they'll shred those as well. So deer are a big problem, so we use netting of all varieties. This is just a small witch hazel, but witch hazel is a great shrub, so you want to protect it. The second critter that gives us agina are the rabbits, and we actually have created what we call rabbitats, where we take so much of the shrubs. I'm just looking for a pile of sticks and shrubs that we pull together, and we put them in piles because that creates great habitat for not just rabbits, but sparrows and vireo and low feeding wren and all that. So it's very beneficial, but you know, you're attracting rabbits, and we're getting a lot of rabbits here, and they can just eat through this netting and girdle, chew on the soft bark, and that's another hazard that we face. We have a lot of these tubes. People ask, when do you get rid of the tubes, because they're pretty unsightly, but honestly, I think it's easier to just create broader netting sections, and then we can pull the tubes up. So that's what we're doing, and we were able to take the tubes off of about 34 different trees last week by taking that approach. So one of the unexpected bonuses that we got on this field in particular, and there are many of these stories from the unexpected explosion of field daisies that greeted us last spring. Here we had an unexpected explosion of something called white snakeroot, and it's a late blooming plant which is incredibly valuable for migrating birds, but also migrating butterflies, the most famous being the monarch. And this whole field, if you can picture it, was just covered with white snakeroot about this high, and the butterflies were, as they say, staging. They were massing along this whole field. It's about 2 acres, and we're looking west. The sun is going down. It's right in my eyes now, but the photographers were lined up to get pictures of all these monarchs, and I counted somewhere between 800 and 1,000. Others were somewhere in the 800 to 700. We had a bunch of different estimates, but for 2 weeks, these monarchs were just in great profusion, and then they all left, with a few exceptions who missed the message, and God knows where they are now. But we didn't expect that. We didn't plant the snake root. We didn't expect that we were going to be having this kind of a visitation, and it's just one of my favorite stories of the preserve.
Well, I think your work is just about done, right?
Yeah, I think we can just leave it to Mother Nature now, right, Jerid?
No.
No?
There's been many lessons, as Charlie's telling the story, how these things just happen. Nature is so much bigger. You throw a little at it, and all of a sudden appears these insects and bugs, and starts healing itself, and you get so excited. But of the many lessons, one of the harshest lessons, in the very beginning I was talking to Charlie and saying, okay, what's the plan? When will we be done with this? What's it going to cost? Is it going to be a 4-year plan, 5-year plan? And what we realize, it's never will be completed. That nature isn't sustainable. We've caused enough damage by introducing these plants, and these plants are extremely aggressive. And we would like it to always be this way, 100 years from now, 200 years from now, but if we walked away right now, even in 2 years, the plants, you see garlic mustard here, you see Japanese honeysuckle over there, the vines, the wineberry. It is just waiting for its opportunity, and the 6 years and the many hundreds of thousands of dollars and many hundreds of people working on it,
Hours of work, yeah.
would be lost so quickly. These plants, and it's not a lesson people are talking about, and not an issue that people are aware of, but they are very, very, very aggressive, and they're not going away, I don't think, ever. Right, Charlie?
Yeah, I was being a bit facetious that our work is over, but you know, they say build it and they will come, and I think, Jerid, we saw that we got birds that hadn't been seen in Connecticut for years showing up, and we had butterflies. I mean, the monarchs have always been here, but in those kinds of numbers, and you know, the bee populations and all that. So we're very excited. We're talking to some experts who want to put in some metric systems to start baselining exactly what we have and how those numbers improve over time. We frankly don't have the budget to do it right now. Hopefully we will get the budget, but it would be great to be able to chart the increase in diversity, not just of the plants, which are very evident because we had to buy them and stick them here, but all the other things, and some underground and some in the marsh that you don't see unless you really take the time to look for them. So it's been a great project, Jerid, and it's really just the beginning.
And I, the voice of the community, want to say thank you to both of you for the incredible work and energy that's been put into this preserve. We wish you the best. So there you have it, an amazing story about two men who came together with a vision and galvanized an army of volunteers who turned this sanctuary into the jewel of Southport. We can all be a part of this story by volunteering, planting pollinator pathways in our backyards, contributing money, and supporting efforts like these to reclaim habitat. We hope you'll join us for the series of YouTube videos that will discuss the plantings in the wetlands, woodlands, and meadows of this preserve. Look for Roots to Branches. The story continues. Thank you.